Okay, we are live. My banner didn't work. So today's guest or today's candidates are Lindsey Prather and Eric Ager, and Dr. Chris Cooper is the moderator. Eric Ager is with District 115 and Lindsey Prager. Whoops, that's wrong. Eric Ager is with District 114 and Lindsey Prather is with District 115. Welcome to WPVM's forum. And carry on.
Great. Well, thanks. I'm Chris Cooper, and I'll be helping moderate today's discussion. And before we get to the candidates and the elections themselves, I just want to thank you for tuning in. As far as I figure, we need three things for democracy to work at a bare minimum. We need dedicated election administrators who are doing this work and making sure that our ballots are counted fairly and that our elections are secure. We need an informed citizenry, and we need quality candidates running in competitive offices. And luckily for us in Buncombe County for these seats, we have all three of these. So today we'll be welcoming Eric Ager, the Democratic candidate running for NC 114, Lindsey Prather, the Democratic candidate running for NC 115. The Republican candidates running for each position, Sherry Higgins and Ruth Smith, initially agreed to attend, but had something come up, so they could not make it. We encourage you to consult their websites, consult local media to learn more about their backgrounds and positions. So we'll go in just a second into our opening statements, and both candidates have been asked to prepare opening statements as they would normally for a forum like this. But given all the movement in our districts over time, it gets a little confusing, right? So I'm going to ask the candidates maybe to give their opening statement, talk about themselves and how they got here, but also maybe tack on a little bit at the end about exactly where their district is and who has the opportunity to vote for them. So with that, we'll begin with Representative Ager.
Well, thank you, Chris. And, it's really great to be here. Thank you for putting this on, and thanks for being the moderator. My name is Eric Ager. I'm running for North Carolina House District 114. And just to get it out of the way quickly, that new District 114 is really Black Mountain, Swannanoa, parts of Riceville, and then Fairview, and then all of South Asheville, all the way out to Candler. And so that is different than the one that I ran in before. I grew up here in Fairview at Hickory Nut Gap Farm. We were a dairy when I was growing up, and now obviously do lots of other things. I went to Fairview Elementary and then went on to Reynolds High School. And then when I graduated from Reynolds, I went to the Naval Academy and then spent 25 years in the Navy. So I grew up here and then spent a long time away, partly overseas and partly, here in the U.S. in different places. I was a helicopter pilot for most of my career and then moved on to do a lot of international work for the last 10 years. And really that's why I got involved in politics. Is I was working internationally, working kind of in the democracy and security forces space. And in the last 10 years, I retired in 2021. So the last seven years of my career were overseas. And just got worried about our democracy back home. Didn't quite understand why it wasn't working as well as I sort of always imagined it would, and thought this would be a great, that coming back and retiring and coming back home and getting into this would be at least a way to learn. I'm not sure I've learned everything there is to know, but I've certainly learned a lot in the last couple of years while serving as the representative in the North Carolina House, and think we still have a lot of work to do in the democracy space. As you stated, one of the most important things is to have competitive races, and unfortunately in North Carolina we don't have a lot of that. And that's primarily due to gerrymandering and really efforts to create uncompetitive districts. And it affects both sides. But the reality of it is that we need a system in North Carolina where we have a completely bipartisan or nonpartisan system for determining districts. And I don't care what it takes. Get the ping pong balls out. Do what you need to do. And let's make sure that the districts are competitive across the board. I spent the things that I sort of care the most about and the things that I've worked on in the North Carolina House are first and foremost, obviously grew up on a farm, came back and got wrangled into running the farm here for a year and still work here on the farm as on our nonprofit side with the horses. Really bringing farmers and environmentalists together to take care of the soil, air, land, and water. I think those are the two groups in our state that care the most about the soil, air, land, and water, but they just don't always, come together culturally. And so that's a role I think I can play effectively. I'm also a veteran, and obviously that's really important to me. And so taking care of our veteran community here in Buncombe County and throughout the state is really a critical thing that I look at. And that includes mental health care, that includes health care, and those things do often bleed together. And then, there's the other big issues. I mean, we've got to have more broadband here in North Carolina, and we've made a little progress on that here in the last couple of years, and that's a great thing. But we've really got to make sure that everybody, even in our rural communities, is able to participate in the modern day economy, and that's just not always true in today's age. So those are the things that I care about. And finally, I'll just say that I think, there's a lot of issues to talk about here. There's a lot of big statewide issues, and I'm sure we'll touch on those. But my wife, Rachel, and I, we raised 4 kids while traveling overseas, all over the place. And I think what I see here as I come back home is that life has never been harder for young families. And we've really got to do that across a wide variety of policy areas. So thanks again for doing it, and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much. Representative Prather.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Lindsey Prather. I am the current representative serving District 115, and I am running to continue being an independent voice for Buncombe County in the State House. A bit of background, I live in Candler with my husband and my 70-pound boxer bulldog. I'm a proud product of North Carolina public schools. After graduating from high school, I came to UNC Asheville as a teaching fellow and spent many of the years since in Buncombe County classrooms teaching special education, civics, and U.S. history. When I'm not down in Raleigh, I work at UNC Asheville in the admissions office, helping to recruit military and transfer students and adult learners. My campaign revolves around some core values like a woman's right to reproductive health care, the right of our students to have an outstanding public education, and the need for more affordable health care. These are just a few of the beliefs that I share with so many people here in Buncombe County and are issues that I have worked with members of both parties to address. The recent abortion ban that was rushed through the legislature without the input of medical professionals or the people most affected shows just how out of touch some lawmakers are with the realities that are facing women today. Many of these lawmakers claim to stand for freedom, yet are all too willing to strip away a woman's right to make deeply personal decisions about her own health. These extreme policies put lives at risk and impose government control over what should be personal decisions between a woman and her doctor. As a former public education teacher, I have seen challenges and triumphs of our education system firsthand. I am passionate about ensuring that every student has the opportunity to succeed. From my early days in elementary school to my graduation from Western Carolina for grad school, the education that I received shaped who I am today. And it is that background that fuels my commitment to better public education for every child, no matter their zip code. Finally, affordable healthcare is an area that I'm especially proud of my bipartisan record. I worked with both Democrats and Republicans to expand Medicaid, helping over 600,000 North Carolinians get access to healthcare, including over 13,000 just here in our county. Unfortunately, here in Buncombe, especially over the last few years, we know all too well how important a quality healthcare system is to the community. So again, I'm Lindsey Prather. I am here to discuss the future of our community in North Carolina, and I look forward to talking about how we can work together to build a better state for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So we'll stay with you, Representative Prather, for the first question. So both of you, as you know well, are running for re-election following a term in the General Assembly. I'm curious, and I think listeners will be too, what you learned during your time in office, right? How does the work of a member of the General Assembly differ from your expectations going in, and how is it similar?
Sure, absolutely. And I would like to start real quick. I neglected to mention the district. So as I mentioned, I live in Candler. So when I won office in 2022 for the first time. My district was Western and Southern Buncombe County. So Candler, Arden, some parts of West Asheville, South Asheville, Biltmore Forest. The new district now, District 115, that people will get to vote for me this year on your ballot is mostly Northern Buncombe County. So we have some parts of Candler, pretty much down 151, and then north from there, Sandy Mush, Lester, Weaverville, Barnardsville, and then a little bit of Swannanoa and Riceville that I split with Eric. So what I have learned in the legislature, it has certainly been an adventure. As a former civics teacher, I had a good sense of what to expect down in the legislature, but I don't think that you can really know what it's like unless you're down there. There are a lot of things that I think have disappointed me. So for example, there's not nearly as much discussion about policies and how to compromise and how to get things done as you would hope there is in state government. Of course, I attend every committee meeting. I didn't miss a single vote down here during my first term. Have been very, very engaged and involved, but a lot of the decisions that are made are being made behind closed doors by leadership. And so I continue, of course, to vote the way that my conscience and my constituents want me to vote, to speak on the floor about issues and to work hard to push for things that are gonna help folks in Buncombe County. But a lot of those decisions are being made at the leadership level, and it's really frustrating because there's a lot of North Carolinians that aren't truly being represented down there. But I also learned that a lot of the votes that we take in the legislature are bipartisan votes. Probably most of the votes that we take down there are almost unanimous. So a lot of the things that we do, the good work of government, is stuff that everybody agrees on. It's really those kind of culture war and high profile stuff that the newspapers write about that people pay most attention to.
Fantastic. Representative Ager?
Yeah, that was a great, Lindsey and I had a great time learning this together. We sit next to each other in the North Carolina House, and so have had lots of discussions as we go through this. I think what I learned, a couple of other things are that, you really can help people. And so, I've really focused a lot on constituent services. You get down there bright and bushy-tailed as a newly elected legislator and realize that you're a freshman in the minority party and that it's really hard to get things done. But at the same time, you really can help people. People will answer your phone calls and answer your emails, and you can get people connected in your community, which I think is really a key component of a representative government, is having that person who can connect people to the right places in their government and make their government work well. I mean, you can also build relationships, and again, it takes a lot of work, but you can build relationships across the aisle, and you can work to get things done, for your district and for the state. And in general, people will listen if you really work hard on that relationship. I do wish there were more forums, as Lindsey mentioned. I think we could do a much better job of having forums for discussion where you really kind of have an issue that needs to be solved, and then everybody brings their ideas to the table and has that discussion and then come up with policies that make sense. The current current Republican majority is much more interested in kind of doing things behind closed doors without much input from the other side, which I think is often a mistake.
Great. Fantastic. So we'll stay with you, Representative Ager, for the next question. And I think some of this we can kind of glean maybe from your introductions, but I'm curious to dig a little deeper. So most legislators, obviously all legislators have to vote on a host of issues, right? You're voting on healthcare one day, de-annexation in some town you've never been to the next day, but most seem to specialize in one or two areas where they attempt to make the most impact. So assuming you agree with that generalization, and if you don't, please let us know, but assuming you agree, where have you chosen to focus your energies, and how might that change if you're elected to a second term?
Yeah, so I mean, I think my focus really has been on agricultural and environmental issues. That's kind of where I've been able to take a little bit of a leadership role. I'm the sort of Democratic shadow chair, we call it, of the Agriculture Committee in the North Carolina House. And so, I've really focused on that area. Obviously, I grew up on a farm. I live here now and continue to work here. And really, it's about, how do we take care of small farmers? The current legislature has done a pretty good job of taking care of people. Sorry about that. The Republican legislature has done a pretty good job of taking care of the big people in the industry, but we don't have many big people in the industry here in Western North Carolina. And so I'm just really focused on doing that. But also I've taken a leadership role in veterans issues and trying to be a voice for veterans in the North Carolina House. And then also paying really close attention to healthcare and regulatory reform. So those are the things that I've paid attention to.
Great, fantastic. Representative Prather?
Yeah, so I did. We're gonna have to see that dog on camera at some point.
I'll get him up here.
So as I mentioned in my introductory statement, there are quite a few core values and issues that I have spent my time in Raleigh focusing on. One of those is, of course, is education. As a former public school teacher and current public university employee, I care deeply about education. When I was growing up in North Carolina, we had the best public education system in the South. And a lot has changed since then, and I would like to see us get back to that. So that includes everything from raising teacher pay to making sure that we have all the support staff and in the ratios that we need. So counselors, nurses, social workers, school psychologists, all of that. And just as a reminder, when we're talking about strengthening schools, we're also talking about strengthening communities, because in so many of our counties, that school really is the community center for that community. Of course, reproductive health care is important to me as well. I'm the youngest woman currently in the state legislature, one of a handful that are still of childbirthing age. And so this is very relevant and personal to me. I am very concerned that we are building a state where our daughters and nieces are going to have fewer rights than we currently have. So that's something that I've been very, very strong in. Of course, healthcare as well, but in particular, rural healthcare. I was very proud to vote for Medicaid expansion, but we can't just pat ourselves on the back and say we did it and then move on to a different issue. We need to make sure that people who have health insurance actually have access to healthcare providers. And so I've been working to try to incentivize folks to provide healthcare out in rural areas, and loan forgiveness programs for people that are willing to work in underserved communities to make sure that we're providing that healthcare, including mental health care. And then finally, transparency and accountability has been a big topic of mine as well. I am very passionate about good government, small d democratic principles. I was horrified this last term when our Republican-led legislature stripped away the public's access to legislative records. We as legislators are now able to sell or destroy or do whatever we want with our own records that the public should have access to. We actually earned the Black Hole Award from the Society of Professional Journalism for that bill. And so after that, I did file a constitutional amendment in the legislature to restore access to those records so that the public knows what our government is doing.
Great. And actually, that's a perfect segue into my next question. So thinking a little bit about both your term in office. So I was going back and looking through bills you're primary sponsors of, and if my math was correct, none of those made it to the floor for a vote, right? Which makes some sense given the partisan realities of the General Assembly. So can you talk a little bit about your strategies as you think about what kinds of bills to sponsor, what kinds of bills to not be primary sponsor for, and what can we expect to see you proposing next term in terms of bills you will be the primary sponsor of? And so we'll begin with Representative Prather. I'm sorry.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So yeah, that's a great question, and especially relevant to those of us that are in the super minority party currently in the legislature. So I will say I did have one bill that ended up being sort of rolled into a larger bill. So that was my sponsorship of Buncombe County schools having the right to dictate their own school calendar. So this is something that has been an issue across North Carolina for a long time now, where school districts are don't have that flexibility to determine when the school year starts and when it ends. And that causes all types of issues, including, not being able to complete the first semester of high school before Christmas break. And so you're coming back after a couple of weeks and taking exams, and not being able to align your school closer to the community college calendar for students that are taking dual enrollment classes. So that is something that I proposed, and that passed the Education Committee in the House. And then it was then sort of taken out and then lumped in with another bill with other counties for calendar flexibility, which passed the House and did not pass the Senate. That was totally fine by me. I don't care who gets credit when we pass legislation in Raleigh. I am perfectly happy. And this is something that happens a lot, that you have a good idea that you file, and then the party that's in power kind of takes that idea and runs with it with their own names and puts on whoever they want to put onto that legislation. And again, that's fine with me. If it's something that gets done and if it's something that serves North Carolina, then I don't care about getting credit for that. I will continue to file bills similar to the bills that I have filed here in the House. Again, they have mostly been focused on education and reproductive health care, but also bills that are specific to Buncombe County. So, for example, there have been a couple times this year that the legislature has sort of picked on Buncombe County and sort of implemented these unfunded mandates onto our county. For example, requiring that we conduct this study on school consolidation between our two school districts, but then requiring that the county pay for that. The state changed the way that we elect our school board members, and then required that the county pay for those maps. And so what I did is I filed legislation to reimburse the county from the state for those costs that were required by the state. And so I will continue pushing for things that help and serve Buncombe County, and that make it easier for the county to do their job when the state is imposing various requirements on them.
Great. Representative Ager?
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a great list. And I think, that ability to work together as a delegation is really important in Buncombe County, and our ability to work together to try to help save or, solve problems that we run into here. There's really two reasons to file a bill, the way I look at it. One is to put out a message that says, hey, here's what I believe in. And then the other is if you actually want to get something done. And there's two very different strategies for approaching those different kinds of bills. And on the messaging side, get out the message. I think we need to continue, and I will certainly continue to introduce legislation that makes our democracy better. And that includes things like, nonpartisan redistricting. That includes things like ensuring that our government, ops committee doesn't have sort of the power that it has to mess with different entities in our state. That includes things that will make sure that everybody can vote in elections, and that make our election systems better and safer. And I think we have great election systems, but we need to continue to make sure we get as many people to vote as we can. I think that's important. And then on the hey, let's actually get things done side, it really is about building relationships across the aisle, and choosing issues that aren't going to have a real partisan bent to them. We were fortunate this year to get some money into the budget, which is kind of the big bill that we pass every year. That included, $2 million for agricultural cost share money, focused just on the French Broad River Valley. And that really does two things, right? That allows us to get money into farmers' pockets to do the practices that they really want to do anyway, but don't often have the money to do. And it helps to improve the water quality in the French Broad and all the streams and rivers and creeks that flow into that French Broad. And so, that's what you can do by working across the aisle. And certainly I'll be working on many more of those proposals. There's some of that ag cost share money has been hard to get out. And so putting some fixes where we allow engineering to work, to hire engineers in the state government to do that. And then the other thing that I think on the budget side we can do is really advocate for our state workers, which includes, folks that work in the extension office, folks that work at the DMV, teachers, all the bus drivers. We really haven't done any favors for that group of people in the last couple of years, and that includes retirees. And so really working to advocate in the budget for those folks, I think is something that we can do. And I think there's room for work on that on a bipartisan basis.
Great. That's great. Representative Prather, do you have anything else to add before we move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick note just to remind folks that, when we're talking about the legislation that we file and that we try to bring to the floor, this isn't stuff that's just coming out of my head or Eric's head. This is legislation that is mostly coming from constituents and from our county and other organizations. So, for example, Eric and I both attended an interdepartmental law enforcement officer meeting a while back of, officers from across the county and different levels of government, and they spoke a lot about what their needs were for law enforcement officers in Buncombe. And then we went down to Raleigh and filed legislation to support law enforcement officers and provide more mental health resources. So, we are always open to constituents, reaching out and telling us what they think a legislation we should be working on.
Great. Well, that's actually another really nice transition to where I wanted to go next. So you both mentioned listening to your constituents a number of times throughout our conversation thus far, but we've also talked about how both of your districts have moved in some pretty substantial ways. So when you say you're listening to your constituency or listening to constituents, who are you talking about? Are you talking about people just in your district? Or are you talking about people in Buncombe County, people in Western North Carolina, the state of North Carolina, Packers fans? Like, how do you define your constituency? So we'll begin here with Representative Ager.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, I think that's really important. And, it's a little bit disappointing, I think, for constituents and for our state that over the last 10 years or so, those districts have changed so much, because it not only makes the elections less competitive, but it also means that people don't have any idea who their representative is, because it changes every couple of years, and that can be really problematic. I think as a Buncombe delegation, we're pretty good at working together and willing to work for folks that live in Buncombe County. And so I think, we may, sort of pass that off between each other depending on the districts. But I think we're very focused on Buncombe County, and I certainly am. There are issues, obviously, that affect the whole state that you need to take into consideration. But, my job is as the representative of the people in my district. And so that's the folks that I pay the closest attention to. And those are the folks that certainly I spend the most time with.
Great. Representative Prather?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I would agree. So, one of the difficult things about folks who live down in Western North Carolina is that we're very far away from the state house. And a lot of times it can feel like, legislators maybe don't listen to you unless you're physically down there in Raleigh, making the public comment in the meetings, or, showing up at the rallies and things like that. And that's just not possible for most people that live out here in Western North Carolina. So you shouldn't have to drive all the way down to your state house just to get your legislators to listen to you. So, I've held town halls out here. I've had, coffee and conversations with folks out here, inviting people to come talk to me and let me know what issues they're dealing with. And that's been really successful. And I've met with a lot of constituents and learned about a lot of issues just from those one-on-one conversations. I show up to as many community events as possible within the district, just to make myself visible and accessible, and to, again, learn more about what's happening in our community. In particular, having a district that is so new, that has been a lot of my work recently, is getting to know the issues in that district. But again, Eric is right. I mean, we mostly focus on helping folks in Buncombe County. I mean, when somebody, and we get contact from constituents in all sorts of ways. Sometimes it is kind of those form emails where you sign up and it says, tell your legislator that they need to ban plastic bags, right? So you sign your name and then we get an email, and all those emails look the same. I do read those, and we kind of, I pay attention to how many of my constituents are reaching out to me about this issue. And so I can use that and get a sense of how people are feeling. But of course, we get individual emails and phone calls from constituents as well, looking for specific help on things. If it's something that I'm able to help them with easily, I'm happy to. If it's something that they really do need to connect with their own legislator with, then I will usually connect them with their direct legislator so that they can help their constituent. A lot of our work is kind of connecting people with, their U.S. congressmen or with other state agencies. And so it's not something that we're helping them with directly, but we are connecting them with the folks that need that help. And so I am all ears and always happy to hear from constituents and folks in Buncombe County.
Great. Thank you so much. So we'll begin this one with Representative Prather. I think you'll agree, although feel free to disagree if you would like, but the Republicans seem like they are almost certain to be in charge of the General Assembly next session, right? The odds are definitely in that favor, whether it's a supermajority or majority, we don't know. But regardless, it seems like they are likely to have at least a lot of power, if not the lion's share of power. So what is your approach to working with or not working with, depending on your perspective, what is likely to be a Republican majority? So for the people of Buncombe County, obviously. Representative Prather.
For what it's worth, I agree with your assessment that likely the Republicans will still be in power next year in the legislature, although I have a feeling they won't be in the supermajority anymore. But yes, so that's important. And, since day one, I have made it very clear that I am down in Raleigh for Buncombe County, not just for Democrats in Buncombe County. And so I think that attitude, I have made a lot of friends on the other side of the aisle. We have good relationships. We go out to dinner afterwards, or have breakfast before session. And so those relationships are important to me. But I think it's also important to understand that, my votes are always going to follow my values. So there are certainly ways in which you can compromise on maybe how a policy is implemented, or you can take a first step knowing that you're going to want to extend this policy later on to other folks, versus something like an abortion ban, which I'm just never going to vote for. And so, there's a pretty clear distinction. And I think I've shown really well down in Raleigh this last term that I am an independent voice. I have broken with my party on a few different things. I did vote for the resolution for supporting Israel after October 7th. I did vote against the sports gambling bill, which a lot of my party voted for. And so I'm going to look at every single vote individually, just like I always have. And I think I've really built a reputation down in Raleigh of being someone who is absolutely willing to work with folks on the other side of the aisle. In fact, I was the first Democrat to join a conference committee last year on I was the only Democrat on the UNC system omnibus bill. And so was proud to work with folks across the aisle on that.
Great. Representative Ager.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, I also agree with your assessment that it's unlikely that the Democrats will take back the majority in the House, but I certainly do believe that we'll be in a very different position relationally here coming up in the next session, which will really change the whole debate. If we elect a Democratic governor and we're not in a super minority, that gives you the ability to say no, which is powerful. And that means that the conversation has to open up, right? They need to get Democrats to support anything that they're trying to pass. And I think that will give us a real opportunity to go in and say, hey, if you fix this bill to say this, then we can support it. And I think that ability is a big change. But Lindsey's right. The relationships are what really matter, and there's so many things we do that support your constituents that really aren't partisan, right? They're not strong partisan issues one way or another. They're about sort of meat and potatoes. How do you get things done? How do things work in our state? And I think that those are the things that you can work on very easily across the aisle. And if you have the right relationships and people trust you, then you can absolutely get things done that way. And also, it's a long game, right? I think that's one of the things that I've learned down in the legislature is that, just because something doesn't happen in the first time you try doesn't mean you can't get there eventually. I saw a number of things that passed this year that have been things people have been working on for 6-8 years to try to get done. And I think there's many of those things that you can sort of start the conversation and continue to build on that. And then finally, I think another way that you can sort of have those conversations that really matter are that, there's lots of caucuses of bipartisan caucuses of folks that get together and talk about, early childhood education or, advanced air mobility and how do we, and I feel like those are places where you can really get in, look at the issues, work across the aisle and solve problems that face everybody in our state.
Great. Thank you so much. So we'll go to Representative Ager first on this one. And if you'd like to give equal time to your dog, since we heard about Representative Prather's dog before, feel free to do that at the beginning of this. But so we have talked and we'll continue to talk a lot about policy making. And I'll ask some of those questions in a bit, but as you both know and have, I think, teased a little bit, constituency service is a key part of what a legislator does. You've both been in office for a session. How do you approach constituency service? Do you have a philosophy of constituency service? And how would that feel if you were to be in office for another term? So Representative Ager.
Yeah, well, my dog has now run off and is chewing on a bone, so that's good. Hopefully, Devo is a very young 2-year-old dog that gets excited about things happening outside the house. But just to get to that question on constituent services, and I think really my philosophy is first that you're always willing to listen, no matter what the idea is. I think I'm willing to listen and engage anybody that has an idea. And so I think that's very important. And then, the second part of that is really, digging into the problem, understanding what exactly people are struggling with. And it's not only with the government, it's with Duke Power. And, we've had hundreds of, requests and ideas from constituents over the last year and a half. But just this week had somebody that's trying to build a house in a part of Buncombe County, and and Duke Power told them that it's going to cost them $10,000 to put in a line. But then you can sort of go to the liaisons and work with the senior folks at Duke Power and say, hey, this really doesn't make sense. I'm not sure it was explained correctly. I think this person's getting bad information. And once you understand the problem well enough to convey that message, then often you can get changes. And it comes back. They can get their power in for no money and just pay for power like everybody else. And so it's really there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. There's a lot of difficulty in getting to talk to the right person. And that's really what you can provide as a legislator. I'm often surprised at how much impact we can have on certain issues. The other thing that I've worked on a lot in that regard as well is folks that are trying to, install solar panels or, work with Duke Power to get solar installations or to get data so that they can prove that their building is a green building. All these things that are a little bit confusing to maybe the customer service rep that they're talking to at Duke, but if you can connect them with the right person in the organization, you can often get a much better outcome.
Great, thank you, Representative Prather.
Yeah, so I really approach constituent services with the same philosophy that I approached being a teacher, which is that I'm a facilitator. Right. As a teacher, you're not the holder of knowledge that you're bestowing upon your students. Right. You're creating a situation and an environment where those students can be empowered to dig into that information themselves or to make those connections themselves. And so, as Eric sort of alluded to, and as I mentioned before, a lot of what we do when it comes to constituent services is connecting folks with the department that they really need to be speaking with. And so I work very hard. Nobody should be embarrassed embarrassed at reaching out to the quote unquote wrong person. You shouldn't have to know whether that sidewalk in front of your house is state owned or city owned in order to get somebody to listen to you that it needs to be fixed. Right. And so, you know, a lot of times folks reach out to me and it's actually their congressman or the, you know, the DOT or even their city councilor that they should be reaching out to. But I always make sure to you know, make that a smooth handoff to provide any information that I can at the beginning. When folks are reaching out about legislation, oftentimes it's legislation that I've already filed or that is already in the calendar. And so then I get the opportunity to sort of show them, hey, you can actually go to the NCGA website and see what bills are going to be discussed this week. Here's where you can find the people that are on the education committee. And so this is, you know, there's how you can find their emails to reach out to them about this particular issue. So I really encourage constituents to dig in and try to use that opportunity to teach them a little bit about how their government works. A lot of folks don't know that you can pick up the phone and call your representative and ask them for help. And so, you know, I'm always just encouraging folks to do that. Even if you're not sure if your state rep is the person that's actually in charge of this, go ahead and reach out to us anyway, because we are happy to send you to who can help.
Great. Thank you very much. So as promised, we'll dip back into policy making a little bit in some specific policy areas. So we'll begin with Representative Prather on this one. It's another one you can feel free to disagree, obviously, but I don't think anyone that I've ever talked to would describe the healthcare situation in Western North Carolina as adequate. What can the General Assembly specifically do to help this problem?
Yes. Love this question. So yeah, as everybody knows, we've had some big issues in Buncombe and Western North Carolina when it comes to healthcare, not just the Mission HCA issue, but we've had labor and delivery units closing further out west, and a lot of issues with rural access. So there's quite a few things that the legislature can do. As I said before, I was very proud to vote to expand Medicaid, but we can't just stop there. We have to make sure that we are, ensuring that there are healthcare providers actually there to provide the healthcare that people now have insurance to pay for. And so the legislature can continue working on that access to Medicaid. We can provide incentives, as I mentioned before, loan forgiveness programs for folks to encourage them to provide healthcare out in rural areas. Telemedicine is certainly a room for growth, but that doesn't do you any good if you don't have access to broadband internet. And so, you know, kind of looking outside of the box, what are other things we can do to help support that access to healthcare, like expanding broadband internet so that you don't have to drive 2 hours to the closest psychiatrist for mental health services, things like that. And so those are absolutely things that the legislature can do. Western North Carolina is part of something known as the Healthy Opportunities Pilot, where counties out here have gotten permission to use Medicaid dollars to address the social determinants of health. So for example, if somebody doesn't have electricity, but they have insulin that they need to keep refrigerated, you're going to have health issues because you don't have power in your home. And so using those Medicaid dollars to help make sure that people's electricity bills are paid so that they can keep their medication cold and stay healthy. So taking a look at all of those things that impact healthcare instead of just, do you have a hospital?
Very good. Representative Ager?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that I think there's a lot of things that we can do. Obviously, the healthcare system, or I don't really like to call it a system because I think it's just pieces. But that's there's a lot of federal policy that has an impact on that. But the reality of it is that I think our role as legislators is to really pay attention to the legislation that's coming through the legislature when it comes to sort of large healthcare things. The challenge in the healthcare space is that obviously there are a lot of big players, from insurance companies to hospital systems to that have a lot of money and a lot of ability to impact legislation, and often that stuff is kind of tricky to tease out. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as the representative of the people to make sure that the people's voice is really being heard in that legislation. It it's not obvious. It takes a lot of learning and really trying to understand what the impact is going to be. But the health insurance system, the health insurance carriers, as well as hospitals and others in the medical profession, they're often trying to take care of their own interests, which is fine. That's what they should be doing. But our job as legislators really should be to take the interest of the people into account. And I think that's something that we've often struggled with in the legislature over the long term.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we'll begin the next question with Representative Ager. So let's talk a little bit about election policy. So a few things here. First, if after canvass, the vote tallies show your opponent with more votes than you, will you accept that outcome? Actually, maybe before I get into the next one, we'll just see if we can burn through his candidates real quick on that. So if after canvass, the vote tallies show your opponent with more votes than you, will you accept that outcome, Representative Ager?
Absolutely. That's democracy. That's how our system works.
Great. We'll go Representative Prather real quick on that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So second, and kind of the meat of the question, we've seen a lot of changes in election law in North Carolina. Certainly don't need to tell you that specifically, but not exclusively, House Bill 747 that passed last session. How do you feel about those changes, and what kinds of policies can your constituents expect to see you support if you're reelected in terms of election policy? So Representative Ager?
Right. Well, so I didn't support it and would obviously look to roll back some of those provisions. The way that I approach this is really as a whole is, we need to have elections that are free and the elections that are fair. And that there's real integrity in those elections, which, I think we've built a good system in North Carolina to do. The elections board does an amazing job of really trying to keep things fair. But at the same time, we need as many people to vote as we can, right? And so putting up roadblocks to make it more difficult for people to vote is something that we need to push back against. And I think that's what you would see from me going forward is a desire to eliminate roadblocks, make it easier for people to vote, more early voting, because I think that's a great system that allows people to show up when on their own schedule. We have a little bit of showing up on election day can be difficult if you have a regular job where you have to, get things done on that Tuesday in November. It's not often easy to show up and wait in line and spend 45 minutes to an hour making your voice heard. And so I think early election voting is important, and I think we also need to make sure that we fund the Board of Election both at the state level and at the county level. Those folks are doing pretty incredible work. It's a hard thing to organize, and they need the resources to be able to do it well. And so at this pulling funding or not funding the Board of Elections sufficiently while at the same time asking for, elections that have more integrity just doesn't make sense.
Great. Thank you. Representative Prather?
Yeah, ditto. Protecting the right to vote is fundamental to our democracy. I will absolutely continue to work on legislation and vote for legislation that makes it easier for folks to vote and makes it so that folks who have the right to vote are not being turned away from the ballot box. We have an incredible electoral system in North Carolina. We have a fantastic Board of Elections. We have a great director of elections. Our county boards are fantastic. We do elections really, really well in North Carolina. And I have full confidence in the professionals and the folks that run our elections here in North Carolina. I have attended multiple times the statewide North Carolina Trusted Elections Tour, and I'm just so grateful to these folks. They travel around the state. There's panels of experts to talk to community members. What do our elections actually look like? What does the ballot machine look like? Is it connected to the internet? It's not, by the way. When I press that button on the machine, what actually happens to my vote to where it ends up online? So really breaking down and educating for people. I think the more people learn about how our election system works in North Carolina, the more confidence they have in it. And so we'll continue to, and I included in my legislative newsletter about those tours coming up so that people would have the opportunity to go hear them. I was a member of the Duke Leadership Forum last year, and elections was our main focus. And so we got to take a tour of the Forsyth County Board of Elections and actually see kind of where they store all of the machines and again, kind of the behind the curtain process of how those things work. And so I even felt more empowered after that, knowing how our elections work in North Carolina. And so I think the more we can do to kind of pull back the curtain and make sure people understand the process, the more confidence they'll have in the system. And so, but again, I will continue to vote for things that make it easier for people to have access to the ballot here in North Carolina.
Great. Thank you so much. So we'll stay with Representative Prather for the next one. Affordable housing is often viewed as a local issue, right? So when we're having these same kinds of conversations with city council folks, with county commissioners, we're asking questions about affordable housing. What is the role of the General Assembly, if anything, in helping address this problem that is obviously very real in Western North Carolina? So Representative Prather.
There is absolutely a role that the state legislature can play in affordable housing. And I'm so glad that this question came up, because a lot of people do think it's only something that a city council can do. So North Carolina at the state level has a housing finance agency, and it administers the Housing Trust Fund, which has not been invested in at the level that it should be over these last few years. So what they do at that level, they help provide funding and loans for affordable housing projects across the state. They help provide funding for basic repairs for homes to help people stay in their homes. They prioritize military veterans and people with disabilities so that they don't have to find a new place to live, but they can help them build a ramp or, make basic repairs to plumbing and things like that. So, it's not just, it absolutely is building more housing. We have to build more housing. We have to raise the housing stock. But we also have to make sure we're doing things to help people stay in their current homes so that this problem doesn't just grow more and more and more. And so that's certainly something that we can do. We need to be working closer with local governments. A lot of local governments are kind of slow on this issue. And I think one of the big reasons for that is because you have a lot of folks that might show up at a city council meeting and sort of argue that they don't want this development near their neighborhood, and that's going to push back projects further and further, when sometimes that development just needs to happen. People have to have places to live. And so we are absolutely working with local governments as well. I'm on the local government committee in the legislature down in Raleigh to make sure that they're getting the support that they need. And in some cases, maybe we as the legislature can kind of take the blame on what needs to get done so that the local government can still have a good relationship with their community, but that we're making sure that housing is being built. So we're looking at zoning ordinances. We're looking at requirements for affordable housing projects, things like that.
Fantastic. Representative Ager.
Yeah, thanks. I think Lindsey did a great job of covering it, but we absolutely have to, better fund the Housing Finance Agency. It's that's where the money comes from to finance a lot of these projects, and we have to do a much better job of advocating to get that funding into that agency. And then I think the other thing, and this it can be a little bit controversial, because I think both Lindsey and I are absolutely believers that local, we ought to push decision making as far down on the local level as we can. But it is really difficult for city councils and for boards of commissioners and counties to make a lot of these decisions. I'm a big believer that we've got to increase density in the places where we already have density. And a lot of times zoning makes that really difficult. And when you have difficult zoning in sort of the heart of a city or in parts of a city where people can walk to things and people don't have to get in their car to go everywhere, it tends to push people out to where the regulation is easier to manage. But that doesn't put us in a better place long term in our communities. I think we're much better off if we can continue to build density within our cities, and not build sort of these big apartment complexes far away from anything, where people still have to continue to drive and do all these things. And the other thing that we need to do is encourage a shift. I think we need to encourage a shift to people being able to buy apartments, right? We tend to think of apartments as apartments are for renters. But that doesn't have to be true. I've lived in lots of places in the world and have seen lots of different models on how that can work. And so people ought to be able to build equity at the same time while living in an apartment. And I think that's something that we can probably work to facilitate through the legal structure in North Carolina.
And townhomes and duplexes and,
Right.
all of that missing middle. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. So for the last question, just kind of curious if there is, and I hope there is, one good idea that you've taken from the other political party. One idea where you say, the Republican Party made me think about this issue in a new way, or realize that this is a place of commonality. So sort of one good idea that you would highlight from, in your case, both the Republican Party. So Representative Ager?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one. I mean, I think the best idea and the important idea that the Republicans have brought to the table in a lot of cases is this idea about how we need to manage our fiscal house well. Sometimes there's a desire, and certainly it can be easy to say and do on the minority side. But I think what we have to do is you have to figure out how much money's coming in and how much money's going out, and you have to manage that well. Obviously, we have statutory requirements in North Carolina that require us to balance a budget. But I think they've done a pretty good job of making sure that we maintain our reserves. In the end, I think some of the tax policy is going to put us in a bad place going forward, and so I would like to see that changed. But I do think their focus on fiscal stability is very important.
Great, thank you, Representative Prather.
So I have a very specific example. One great idea that I came around to in the term, my last term this session, was this idea of having career development plans for students starting in 7th grade in middle school. Now, initially, when I heard about this, I started getting worried about tracking the German model. Like, you got to pick your job when you're in middle school and you got to stick with that until you graduate. So I had a lot of concerns about it, but, learning more and kind of digging into what that would look like. And it is going to put some more work on teachers and counselors in the schools to help students with these plans. But I think it's really going to help sort of expand students' imagination of what their options are after they graduate. When I was graduating school, I had a list of like a half dozen jobs really that I could picture myself in. Like, all right, you can be a doctor, you can be a writer, you can be a teacher, you can, go to the military. And yet there's so many other options out there that kids don't know about. And so I like that idea of empowering kids to dig in a little bit more and start thinking about their future at that young age.
Great. Well, thanks so much. That's I think a lovely place to end. I want to thank Representative Prather. I want to thank Representative Ager for coming and spending time with us today. Of course, I want to thank the listeners. And I want to remind folks that the Buncombe County Board of Elections has much of the information about which district you live in. So if that part got a little confusing, you can follow up with the Buncombe County Board of Elections. So I want to remind people that there is a Democrat and a Republican running for both of these seats. So we have contested elections. Sherry Higgins and Ruth Smith, of course, are the Republicans. Neither one was able to be here with us today, but please do learn more about all 4 of these candidates. And thank you for your time.